I'm very pleased to be here with Schiller Institute, and I want you to just know in advance that I come at this as a very patriotic American. I've risked my life hundreds of times in combat, and so I'm very patriotic, but I'm very concerned about NATO. NATO, in my view, poses a very grave threat to world peace. In fact, it is the centerpiece of the deep state. Going back in 1949, NATO was formed as a defensive alliance against the Soviet Union, which was massively powered by nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union, in response, formed the Warsaw Pact 6 years later in 1955. Many years of Cold War went on. Fortunately, there was no nuclear war or conventional war. The Cold War ended in 1991 when the Soviet Union dissolved and communism was discredited. The Warsaw Pact dissolved that same year. Now, by 1991, NATO served no practical purpose, and it should have been dissolved. It would have been a great thing for world peace had it been dissolved. Now, Donald Trump campaigned on withdrawing from NATO because it was obsolete. And he made a pledge to normalize relations with both Russia, with Syria. However, the problem with this is that it would have destroyed the raison d'etre, the very reason for the existence of NATO and the deep state. And it is that principal reason, in my opinion, that caused President Trump to face a continuing coup that began before he was elected and that culminated in the massive election fraud that we have just seen. Now, the Russian hoax put President Trump's back at the wall. He was forced to modify his anti-NATO rhetoric and sort of morph it into a demand that NATO simply purchase more weapons. They've done this. And of course, this has only further exacerbated the arms race between NATO and Russia. Now, NATO and the military-industrial complex, the entire deep state, employ millions of influential bureaucrats. They depend on public perceptions of non-existent threats for their existence. There are millions of defense-related jobs that are involved in this. But the fact is that except for minor border skirmishes with Mexico, the United States has never been invaded by a foreign nation since the War of 1812. Back then, we were a small, weak nation, and today we are now the monolith of the world. The U.S. defense budget is so large that it's now larger than the 10 largest defense budgets of other nations. We have 3 times the budget of China, 15 times the budget of Russia, and 40 times the budget of Iran. Is one thing we need to understand: Russia does not want war. They don't want a nuclear war, certainly, and they cannot fight the United States and NATO conventionally. But the U.S. has dismantled almost all of the nuclear disarmament treaties that were painfully negotiated over decades. And now we are developing small-yield nuclear weapons whose only purpose is to make nuclear war a more practical reality. So NATO, which once defended Europe, is now fighting aggressive wars in the Middle East, and they're being recruited to confront China and to join in on that that venture, which is very likely to occur. Each of these expansions of NATO raise the specter of a nuclear war. If World War III breaks out, it will kill vast numbers of American citizens, and NATO will be to blame. The death toll will exceed any war that has ever been fought by many, many times. It would poison the earth with radiation. It would cause a total breakdown in trade, transportation, and food production. It possibly would end civilization altogether. Now, it's important for Americans to understand the geography of the world. The United States was blessed by having massive oceans on either coast, the Pacific, the Atlantic, that extend for many thousands of miles. So we are not threatened. No nation can invade the United States. And unless we threaten others, there is absolutely no realistic fear of war. Ordinary Americans gain nothing by the endless wars that we're fighting under the aegis of NATO and our allies. And it's important to realize that when the balloon goes up, top government officials and the global oligarchs will shelter in prepared underground cities, but the rest of us will be incinerated by their folly. We will have NATO to thank for the demise of Western civilization. Thank you very much.